Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on better water management through the planning system. I'm Shaffer. I'm from CIRIA and I coordinate the work that we undertake on urban water management and blue-green infrastructure. So, as I said before, if you've just joined us, your microphones have been muted, but throughout the presentations you can pose questions by using the dialog box and typing those, and hopefully we will have some time after each individual presentation to go through that, and we've also got some time at the end to go through those questions to the panel. So this webinar today is showcasing the guidance and case studies from CIRIA's recent free publication on delivering better water management through the planning system. So really, in recent months, we've been inundated with rainfall and also a number of climate change emergencies. So with the growing concerns about water infrastructure, it's never been more important to deliver better water management. While water is just one aspect of planning, it remains fundamental to every part of our life. So without better water management, as you know, we can have flooding, water shortages, and impacts on the environment in terms of water quality and just poor quality of places and spaces. So this seminar provides an overview of the guidance which explains how effective local plan policies underpinned by robust engagement and evidence can improve water management, the key characteristics of good local planning, local policy for delivering integrated water management, and how this fits in within the planning policy framework are clearly set out in the guidance, and advice on making good policies also illustrated by examples of good local plan policies and good practice. I've been lucky enough to be joined by the guidance authors, Peter and Andrew, and also those involved in developing planning policy and delivering good practice that's been exemplified in the guidance. So I have a couple of the speakers physically with me in the office. So if you hear chairs scraping, that's as we jostle places to use the webinar software. As you can see on the screen, you can download the guidance for free from the CIRIA website, and if you use this URL, you'll be able to get it a lot easier than you would do by probably following the CIRIA website. So the guidance has been split into several parts. The overall document includes everything, including case studies, examples of good practice, and links to national planning policy, and then there's our separate sections, and Peter and Andrew will go into a bit more detail about that. So moving on to the agenda, we have a great lineup of presenters for the webinar. So this webinar is going to be recorded and will be available on the susdrain YouTube channel in the new year, so please keep an eye out for that and share that with colleagues when it's available. I'm in the process of providing the introduction. Peter Bide and Andrew Coleman, as I said, the authors of the guidance and independent consultants, will provide an overview of the guidance document. Emma Davies from Greater Cambridge Shared Planning, which is a strategic partnership between Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire District Councils, will provide an overview from a planning perspective on water management in Cambridge. And finally, Suzanne Scobie from Aecom will provide a presentation on good practice being delivered in Cambridge. So we may not be able to stick to the precise agenda timings that we have on the website, but we'll definitely be able to get you to continue work at 1:30 and enable you to finish your lunch. So, as I said, please do think about the questions and type those in the dialog box as necessary, and I will get to those at the end. So I will now start the transition to bring up Peter's presentation, and we will have a joint presentation from Peter and Andrew, and we will seamlessly transition between Peter and Andrew. So,
good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Bide. I'm as Paul said, one of the authors of the guidance, and with Andrew, we're going to run through what the guidance does and the issues it raises. So, what are we going to cover this morning? Well, we want to explain what integrated water management is, why it's important, and what it can deliver. We also want to cover why it matters and how integrated water management can be delivered through the planning system. In the course of our research, we discovered that there are several factors, 5 actually, which are critical for delivering successful integrated water management. So we'll cover those. We'll explain who does what the responsibilities are, and we'll explain the role of national and local planning policy. So, first of all, thanks to all our supporters. As with most CIRIA projects, we wouldn't have been able to do this without support, financial and otherwise, from a number of organisations which are listed here. We also had a very supportive steering group with a large number of people involved, including target audience, relevant institutions and stakeholders. And the work's been endorsed by the catchment-based approach, by the Royal Town Planning Institution and by the Town and Country Planning Association. Well, what is integrated water management? Well, it's a concept that brings together a range of interventions to make the most of the opportunities we have to improve people's lives, while also avoiding and mitigating the risks from too little or too much water and water pollution. And with this in mind, we come up with this definition: a collaborative approach to managing land and water, which delivers coordinated management of water storage, supply, demand, wastewater, flood risk, quality of water, and the wider water environment. So that's what we're talking about. And why is it important? Well, this diagram sums it up. Integrated water management is driven by urban planning, it's facilitated through urban design, it's a key part of placemaking, and it improves landscape. And through doing this, it creates truly sustainable development. And if you look at those 3 dark blue circles, it brings together water supply, surface water and flood risk management, and wastewater disposal. And it realises the benefits for each sector in an integrated and much more effective way. And that produces the 10 outcomes that you can see around the outside edge of the circle. And here are and I'll go through these 10 outcomes in more detail. So this is what integrated water management delivers. Reduced risk from flooding. From a range of sources, flooding at a range of scales, landscape scale, natural flood risk management, reducing the risk of river flooding, right down to SUDs reducing and attenuating runoff on individual developments to reduce the risk of local flooding. It brings us increased water efficiency and reduced water stress through rainwater harvesting and use. And if this is linked to water efficiency measures in buildings, the savings can be really significant. It creates a clean and good quality water environment by reducing and removing pollution from surface water and providing a more natural and biodiverse water environment. It enables new housing by providing integrated water management solutions to challenges such as flood risk, availability of water, lack of drainage capacity, and poor urban environment. It facilitates economic growth and regeneration by improving urban environments and enabling sustainable development. It enhances biodiversity. Integrated water management interventions can provide a more natural environment, introducing a range of habitats and species, from wetlands to wildflower meadows, at a range of scales, often in otherwise biodiversity poor urban areas. We can create better blue-green infrastructure, providing functional and connected green space, which delivers multiple benefits and connects urban places for water, wildlife and for people. It improves the accessibility of public spaces and places and enhances well-being. Providing good quality open space, which as well as managing water is accessible, creates more livable places and promotes health and well-being. Very topically, it can mitigate and adapt, and help us mitigate and adapt to climate change, because providing urban green space at a range of scales makes urban areas more resilient by reducing the urban heat island effect, reducing energy consumption, making better use of water, and enabling our towns and cities to better cope with more extreme weather events. And finally, by using resources more sustainably and effectively through integrated water management, we can create cost savings and efficiencies, particularly through partnership working and delivering multiple benefits. This makes schemes affordable, so more can be done for less. But why does planning for water matter? Well, extended periods of extreme rainfall are already 7 times more likely than in pre-industrial times. More than 5.2 million people in the UK live and work in 2.7 million properties that are at risk of flooding from rivers and the sea. 3 million are also at risk of surface water flooding, and 200,000 are at risk of groundwater flooding, and that's just the ones we know about. Only 10% of floodplains continue to provide their natural flood attenuation function, and 42% of floodplains in England and Wales are separated from their rivers largely by engineering. And part of this problem arises from granting of planning permission for house building. Residential development of floodplains has grown by 1.2% since 2011. That's 0.5% faster than in other areas. It's not all doom and gloom. If we do planning for water properly, using integrated water management, we have the opportunity to design our towns and cities to be greener, healthier, more biodiverse, less liable to flood, and resilient to climate change, the 10 outcomes that I mentioned before. So, how is integrated water management delivered through planning? Well, planning can create blue-green infrastructure. That's the network of green space and water that permeates and connects the urban fabric to provide the elements of integrated water management and deliver the multiple benefits that it provides. Planning can also require and facilitate sustainable drainage systems to manage surface water and collect rainwater for reuse. If planning incorporates integrated water management interventions as part of urban design and placemaking, it will provide good quality open space which, as well as managing water, is accessible and creates more livable places. This in turn attracts business and promotes economic growth. Planning can create opportunities for rainwater harvesting and reuse to reduce demand for mains water. And incorporating integrated water management into the urban fabric creates a more pleasant and healthy environment. The integrated water management measures provide recreational space and a more pleasant and healthy urban environment, promoting well-being and improved biodiversity. And I mentioned at the beginning that we identified in our research the factors which are critical to delivering successful integrated water management, and there are 5 of them. The first one is understanding integrated water management. This diagram is in the report, so if you can't read all the text on the right-hand side, don't worry. But the first of those, understanding integrated water management, is having a proper, robust and accessible evidence base, knowing which interventions and approaches are appropriate, identifying the possibilities at a really early stage, and showing that integrated water management is both effective and efficient. And very importantly, breaking down institutional barriers and changing mindsets. The second critical success factor is having an enabling local policy. That's clear and understandable local plan policies and clear supportive plans and strategies from the lead local flood authority and water company. The third one is early engagement. This is early engagement with water companies, developers, lead local flood authorities and other areas of local government, but also with the local community and with a catchment partnership and other stakeholders. The fourth is partnerships. Partnerships are really important, and this involves good links with and between local planning authorities, lead local flood authorities and water companies, with catchment partnerships and with an engaged and supportive local community. And to make partnerships successful, we need to understand the partner's interests and drivers. And the fifth critical success factor is good management. A strong champion is really important. Early and clear indication of long-term management arrangements is also key, and coordination of budgets and funding is very important too. And we mustn't forget that we need to enforce the planning conditions which are driving the integrated water management in developments. Something else that we discovered in doing this research is there's a process which runs through this. We call it the golden thread, which is also crucial to delivering good integrated water management. And going from the left to the right of this diagram, the principle is very simple. Identify the water-related opportunities and challenges for the community, things like environmental quality, water supply and quality, and flood risk. Then identify the appropriate integrated water management response and put in planning policies to enable integrated water management. And then facilitate the partnerships to achieve the outcomes and realise those opportunities. And critical to making this whole process work, applying those critical success factors and drawing on the case studies and examples of good local planning policy to demonstrate what can be done and how it can be done. This diagram shows how that partnership process works. We start on the top left-hand side, those cogs there. Those are the different stakeholders in a catchment. And if they appreciate each other's drivers and objectives, they can build a mutual understanding of the issues affecting their area. And this shared understanding facilitates collaboration to identify shared objectives. And that links down to the third little circle, the second set of cogs. And these are the shared objectives working together. And building that capacity to deliver multiple benefits and so deliver sustainable development. This diagram is also in the report. As is this one, which is critical to the whole process of building partnerships to deliver integrated water management. And looking at this diagram, that centre green circle is the threshold cost of an imaginary scheme. Now, the different stakeholders who could be involved in the scheme, who benefit from this scheme or want the scheme to be done. The orange circles are the funds that they've already got. And it's very clear that nobody has sufficient funds to do the scheme on their own. And that dotted blue line around the edge of the circles, those are the aspirations of the different organisations and stakeholders which they can't meet from their own funds. But if they all work together, not only can they meet the threshold cost of the scheme, you add all those orange circles together, but they can do more than that. They can meet wider aspirations, or they can do it for a lot less individually. So they can achieve much wider aspirations from the scheme. So that's how I see partnerships working in terms of getting things done and, as I said, getting more for less. Now I'm going to hand over to Andrew now to tell you about the roles and responsibilities, the who does what bit, and the local plan and how the planning system contributes.
Thank you very much, Peter. Hello, everyone. Yes, so Peter's already talked about the importance of partnerships in delivering integrated water management. And to help partnerships work, all the different parties need to understand the key legal and policy drivers and responsibilities that each of those partners have and how they relate to each other. So this diagram is an attempt to show what the main policy levers are, which will need pulling for the different partners. So starting in the top right-hand corner, we've got the Water Framework Directive, the WFD, which sets out the requirements for river basin management plans, which are produced by the Environment Agency in England and Natural Resources Wales. And these plans identify the pressures that the water environment faces and what this means for the current state of the water environment in the river basin district, and crucially, what needs to be done about it, the objectives for those river basins. Moving down to the bottom right, water legislation is the main driver for water companies, and it gives them a statutory duty to prepare and maintain water resource management plans, which look ahead 25 years and describe how each water company aims to secure a sustainable supply of water. It also places a resilience duty on water companies, which includes the requirement to protect the natural environment now and into the future. There are also initiatives within the water industry to look more strategically and produce drainage and wastewater infrastructure management plans to improve wastewater and surface water management. Moving to the bottom left, The Flood and Water Management Act of 2010 introduced the duties for local surface water management, which are coordinated by LLFAs, lead local flood authorities, which are county and unitary councils. LLFAs establish the surface water management strategy for a given location, and they also have a very important role as consultees in the spatial planning system. And moving up to the top left, planning policy for England is set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, and Planning Policy Wales. And further details is provided in the Planning Practice Guidance in England and Technical Advice Notes in Wales. And these are applied through local plans by local planning authorities and associated neighbourhood plans and through assessment of planning applications. In the guide, we also include specific advice for better coordination between local planning authorities and water companies, which is drawn from good practice that emerged during the process of producing the guidance. So, the report provides practical advice to help put in place the policies needed for better integrated water management in local plans. And we did this by using an analysis of national policy, guidance and good practice. And we identified the key characteristics of local policies delivering integrated water management, and also some 15 case studies of good local policy. So I'm just going to take you through these in a bit more detail now. So the key characteristics. Having been one myself, we know how hard-pressed local planning and statutory consultees in the planning system are. And while we searched for examples of good local plans, we managed to identify the key characteristics of the policies to help deliver better water management. And we hope that policymakers can use these to help them draft their own policies. Nearly all of the local plan examples that we found have been found sound by planning inspectors, so we're fairly confident that they will pass muster if you put them into draft plans or when you're reviewing existing local plans. We use guidance from the national policy and guidance of England and Wales, and other good practice guidance that we found, especially that produced by the Green Infrastructure Partnership. We identify the key characteristics in Part A, Section 4, and in Part E we provide examples of each characteristic from the case study local plan, so you can go back and check the exact wording of those local plan policies. So on the right, the key characteristics you can see are evidence-based. It should be fairly obvious, but planners need to have a good evidence base for their local policies, and so we picked out the key documents such as strategic flood risk assessments, green infrastructure strategies, catchment management plans and the like. We also thought it was very important, and we noticed this, that the best local plans had a clear vision. So it was for example, a clear local vision of what sustainable development meant for that local authority area. Or some of them were using a theme such as ecosystem services or climate change adaptation, which ran through the whole of the local plan. Strategic. Well, certainly in England, it's becoming even more important that local plans are strategic. In fact, it's a requirement now that the government has introduced. So there should be a strategic policy that integrates managing flood risk, water quality, water efficiency and blue-green networks. And it sets the framework for any more detailed non-strategic local plan or neighbourhood plan, which sits underneath that strategic planning policy. We also found that the best of the local plan policies avoided duplication, so they weren't simply repeating what was in the NPPF or Planning Policy Wales, but actually translated it into locally specific policy. Clear and positive wording was also very important. So using strong language, and we found it was possible to get very strong policy messages into adopted local plans. Emphasises the requirements for new development to deliver positive benefits. Don't forget that certainly in England, all local plans should be trying to deliver sustainable development and positive improvements. So the best of those policies identified targets. So for example, it actually set out what reduced water demand or better water quality meant. and in some cases link those back to some of those evidence bases, like the river basin management plans. Cooperative. What we mean by this is that the best policies were developed with strategic partners and neighbouring local planning authorities. So sometimes we found that they were joint local plans which covered several local planning authority areas, or that a strategic partner such as a water company or the Environment Agency had actually driven the need for this policy and suggested perhaps the exact wording of it. So it was a shared purpose of the local planning authority and strategic partners. And deliverable. It's essential that water infrastructure is included in infrastructure delivery plans associated with local plans, and also longer term master plans, which identify the management arrangements and the partners who will manage the integrated water management features into the future. So these are all included in some detail in Part E of the guidance. Also in Part D of the guidance, we provide the main policy hooks in English policy, not just the NPPF, but also the 25-year environment plan and the planning practice guidance. And in Wales, the planning policy Wales and technical advice notes. So this is technical requirements or asks. We were asked to do this by the project steering group during the preparation of the guidance. So we looked in the case studies of local plans for good, clear technical asks, which had managed to make it through the local plan examination process. And we produced these in Part A, Section 4 of the guidance. We couldn't find clear technical asks for all elements of integrated water management, but we did for sustainable drainage, water efficiency, water quality and biodiversity, including ecosystem services. We hope that in the future that we will be able to find technical requirements for the other elements of integrated water management. So Part C of the guidance contains the 15 case studies of local plans, which we believe are good practice, present good practice in promoting better water management planning. These emerged from our initial survey, which got a response of over 200, from the project steering group, and also from our own research emerging over the period of a year or two. We aim to get spread across England and Wales, although we did struggle in Wales. We didn't actually find any in Wales, so I'd be certainly happy to hear of some from there if you know of any. We've got a range of urban, suburban and rural authorities, and also different levels of local plans. So we've got regional plans in the form of the Greater London Plan, unitary districts, and also we've got a national park, South Wales National Park, and that's where this diagram comes from, the ecosystem services approach, which runs through their recently adopted local plan. Towards the end of the process, we also heard about some emerging plans as well, which were in draft form. So we've included some examples of those in Part C as well. So the template, we've used a template for the local plan case studies so that they are easy to navigate by users of the guidance. And so each case study includes a list of the policies, the numbers of the policies in the local plans, a summary of the issues that the policies are addressing, particular challenges or opportunities that the local authority was trying to address, the critical success factors and the outcomes which the policies achieve, or in terms of the critical success factors, the ones which actually enable the policies to be included in the local plan, and web links to further information. So that will be the local plans themselves, but also associated information. So, for example, some supplementary planning documents which may be associated with those local plans. 8 of the 15 local plan case studies demonstrated the golden thread link. So the policy, we were able to identify where the policies had influenced projects actually on the ground. And there was also some of the policies that we've included in Part C actually came about because of pre-existing projects on the ground. So if you like, they were a reverse golden thread. Right, I'm going to hand back to Peter now, who's going to talk about the physical case studies.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, to complement the examples of good local plan policy that Andrew's just talked about, we identified some really good physical case studies. Those are case studies of things which have happened on the grounds, which illustrate what we're trying to demonstrate with the guidance. And this is in Part B of the guidance. There are 12 case studies, and each one includes a description of what the case study did. It describes the critical success factors that were involved and the outcomes that the project delivered from those 10 outcomes I mentioned earlier. It says how it relates to planning policy, who did it, and provides further information and links to where you can follow it up. And of those 12 physical case studies, 11 of them demonstrate the golden thread link to planning policy. And 9 of those, it's the direct golden thread. Andrew said there were 8. That's because 2 of the physical case studies are from the same London plan policy. So we've got 9 case studies which demonstrate the direct golden thread, and 2 the reverse golden thread, which Andrew talked about, where the project was groundbreaking and led to the local authority developing policies so more of those sort of things happened in the future. I've also had one physical case study which shows that even if you don't have the planning policy there, if you've got a strong enough champion and you've got a strong enough partnership, you can still do quite amazing things, and that was one up in Durham. So these are really good examples of what can be done, and I think they show that pretty well anything can be done if you can put your mind to it. And so to sum up, what do we need to do to make integrated water management happen? Well, I think as we've shown that partnerships are crucial. Community engagement is also essential. You've got to get local people along with you. Local plans are really key to this. I think this is one of the great messages coming through from this, is what you can achieve through the planning system. Legislation has a role, but not as much as it probably used to, and really changing mindsets is much more important. So I think the overall message that we're trying to get across is that you can't make them do it, but you can make them want to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So we're good for time. We've got a few, I believe we have a few minutes for some questions. So let's see if we have any questions. Bear with me. Okay, so while I'm posing some questions, please do pose some of your own. So thank you for that presentation, Andrew and Peter. I suppose really what's coming down to what we're suggesting is that role of collaboration and partnerships is really important, and some people are more keen to come to the party than others. So is there a way that you can incentivize partnerships?
Thanks, Paul. From what we've done, from all the things we've seen, the key way of incentivizing people to join partnerships and to actively take part in partnerships is to show them that they're getting more out of it by being in the partnership than they would have done it if they'd been on their own. So it's multiple benefits, and it's getting more for less. Those are the two real incentives. You can't make anybody join a partnership. They have to have an incentive, and those are the really strong incentives. It's the cash incentive, the resources incentive, and the what I'm going to get out of it incentive. But you also need to smooth things along a bit in terms of you need a strong champion to bring people together. That's very important. But you need to think very carefully about people timing and different people's budgeting arrangements and what have you. You need to really work with people and be very realistic about what's possible and what's not possible, because different organisations have different ways of working, which may on the face of it seem incompatible, but they're not if you work through things and look at what different people, different organisations, different stakeholders can bring to it. So it's not easy, but we've seen lots of examples, and all those physical case studies are really good examples of what you can achieve through partnership working and the multiple benefits that you can create and the savings that the partners can make. So those are the key things.
Can I just add there? I mean, for planners, there is no bigger incentive than at the moment than getting housing delivered. And a lot of the physical case studies and the local plan case studies are from parts of the country where there is very high housing demand, but also a lot of constraints on water. So in the southeast, water efficiency is a really big driver, and also water quality. There's some parts of the southeast where water quality is actually holding up development. So by taking an integrated water management approach, you can actually help to bring along the regulators, and you can also actually, if you persuade the developers that they are going to be able to get their allocations or their planning permissions by adopting an integrated water management approach, then everybody's objectives can be met in that way.
Thank you, Andrew. There are several physical case studies which show that the development couldn't have happened without integrated water management. So it's a very strong driver in terms of delivering housing.
Okay, great. We have a few questions here actually. So the first one I want to deal with goes to the heart of the definition really. So this is a question from Richard Ashley, and he's saying on the face of it, the definition doesn't really point to multiple benefits. Is there any reason for that?
I'd say that we've spent a long time thinking about the definition, and we think that multiple benefits are inherent in what the definition says without making it too long. So I think delivering multiple benefits is one of the underlying themes of the whole thing. And we could have said multiple benefits in the definition, but we were trying to actually define what integrated water management was, rather than per se what it delivered. But if you look at the outcomes, multiple benefits, the underlying theme to all of those outcomes, and I think the report, the guidance makes absolutely clear that multiple benefits are the key outcome, the key overarching outcome.
Yeah, and I mean, having been part of that definition development process, it's very difficult to develop a definition that actually delivers everything. But I think inherent in our approach to integrated water management, and why we suggest you do that, is obviously looking at the water management issues, but realising that getting the water right and develop will help you inevitably develop a better quality of place that provides something that's more resilient to climate change, and also give some benefits around health and well-being. We take your point, and I suspect one of the many iterations we had for the definition did have multiple benefits in there, but yeah, it is inherent in everything that we're producing in that guidance document. So thank you for that question. So we have one about the process of, and this is from Ingo, so Ingo Schuder, about how did we go about developing the critical success factors, which is coming out of stakeholder consultation or derived from the good practice, or both?
Both really. We started off with a very comprehensive survey, one of the most comprehensive surveys anybody's done in this area, because we started with a fairly blank sheet of paper. I mean, Andrew and I have obviously been involved in this for a long time, and we both had our own ideas, but we thought for this project, let's start with a blank sheet of paper. So we went out and we did with CIRIA's help, we did a very comprehensive survey, and the critical success factors started to emerge from the results of that survey, as did the golden thread. And then we had a lot of help from the steering group, and we talked to a lot more people. Andrew and I spent a long time talking to people about this and listening to what people said. And so that's where we got the critical success factors from. It was a long process of consultation and listening, and similarly the golden thread. So they're not our ideas, they're your ideas.
Great. So the next question, and this is from Joe Bradley, so thank you for that question. Also thank you, Richard and Ingo, for your early questions. Do Peter and Andrew think that we may need to continue to rely on legislation more for water quality than for the other benefits of subs, because the expertise in water pollution prevention and particularly groundwater protection is lacking in many local authorities?
Andrew?
Yeah, I think probably the answer is yes. I take the point that there is, well, for water management in general, I think that there is a lack of expertise in local authorities. A lot of the expertise is probably found in the Environment Agency in England and then our National Resources Wales in Wales, and also in consultancies. And that's, that is one of the drivers behind this guidance, is to try and if you like, spread good practice, particularly to spatial planners. I'm a spatial planner, and although I was lucky enough to specialise in kind of the environmental aspects of that when I was working for the Environment Agency and for local authorities, I realised that those skills are relatively scarce amongst local planning authorities. So yeah, I think we will have to rely particularly on river basin management plans in terms of providing objectives for water quality, but those need to be, I know that one of the issues has always been translating river basin management plans into meaningful policy and guidance for spatial planners, and I think that, I'm hoping that that's where this guidance can help.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right, and I'll hold my hand up and admit that I hadn't put as much emphasis in things I've done in the past on the water quality and water efficiency side of things, because when I originally started doing this, when I was in government, we were concentrating on flood risk management, and integrated water management developed from that. And it's only really in the last few years that we've been linking things together to really, really well, to the extent that we're putting water quality and water efficiency into the equation too. And this is the first piece of guidance, as far as I'm aware, which actually brings those aspects properly into the equation, the water quality and the water efficiency side of things properly into the equation. But we are a bit behind on those compared to the other areas, I think. Okay,
so we're probably coming up to our last question, really, and this is still on the water quality aspect. So that was a great question from Joe, and thanks for your response, Peter and Andrew. So this question is from Matt Williams. Have you any evidence or case studies for your comment regarding water quality holding up development and delivery of growth through housing? I know one anyway. Yeah.
Well, there is a big issue at the moment around the Solent and the capacity of wastewater treatment plants there, and I also recall there also being an issue around Chichester Harbour as well, where the capacity of the wastewater treatment plants wasn't big enough to enable lots of new housing to drain into Chichester Harbour, which has got virtually every European and national designation you can possibly think of. The Environment Agency developers and the Southern Water were having to look very carefully at phasing and that kind of issue, and also at trying to design developments so that the runoff was less, so that the wastewater treatment plants wouldn't have to cope with so much rainwater runoff as well as grey water.
Yeah. And it's not just Hampshire and that part of the world. Two of the case studies in London are where Thames Water couldn't manage the water leaving the grey and black water leaving the site, they needed something to be done in order to get the level of housing developed, Nine Elms and South Bank Place. In order to get that density of housing, a completely different approach needed to be taken in order to limit the amount of water going into the foul water system. And coming back to the Hampshire one, the issue there, it doesn't matter how many, in somewhere like Chichester Harbour, it doesn't matter how many processing plants, waste treatment plants you build, because it's what's actually going into the water. You can only take a certain amount of stuff out in a wastewater treatment plant, so it's not the number of plants, it's the quality of the combined water being discharged from them. So it's not something that the water company can solve. It's something that can only be solved by going back to the development and looking at how what we actually put into the drainage system.
Yes.
And there was a meeting a few weeks ago where the issue of nutrient neutrality has cropped up, and I think nutrient neutrality probably cropped up just as we were finishing and publishing this document. So there's a number of us that are interested to see how we can respond to challenges around phosphates and nutrients and what role sustainable drainage can have with that. So I just want to say thank you to Andrew and Peter for the presentation, and also their response to the questions. And also, so the question is, we're going to move on to Emma now, and I will just try and line up the presentations for that.
I've just unmuted myself, so hopefully you can hear me.
And I will obey instructions and
thank you.
the presentation slide as necessary. Bear with me, I'm just getting onto the presentation format. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Right, so I'm Emma Davies. I work for the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service, which, as already mentioned, is a kind of strategic partnership between Cambridge City Council and South Cambridgeshire District Council, bringing together our two planning services. So I'm going to take you through really our journey in developing local plan and planning policy related to integrated water management. So if we move on to my next slide. So yeah, we've been on this journey really now for well, since the early 2000s really. So we've really first started to think about kind of integrated water management and the role of sustainable drainage from some work that we did to develop an area action plan for what is now known as the Eddington development, which I know Suzanne is going to be talking about in a little bit more detail after I've finished my presentation. So I won't delve into it in a huge amount of detail. But we started work on this document back in, I think it was 2005, so quite a number of years ago now. It's making me feel quite old. And the principle for that development had already been established back in 2003 through an old structure plan that we had developed for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And the land for that development was actually released from the Greenbelt as part of our 2006 Cambridge local plan. So that established the principle of us developing an area action plan for the site. Now, back with that 2006 local plan, we had some policy in that document encouraging the use of sustainable drainage systems, but not requiring them. And we didn't really, at that stage, have an approach to integrated water management. And it was, I would say, definitely through the development of the North West Cambridge Area Action Plan that we started to really think about that approach. And it was something that was also picked up through a document that was produced, again, I think this was back in around 2004 sort of time, which was a quality charter for growth covering Cambridgeshire. And that document was really developed because of the amount of growth that we were seeing in the area. It was an amount of growth that we'd never seen before, but we also recognised that that planned growth gave us an opportunity to create really sustainable and vibrant new communities that responded to a number of concepts. And in the Quality Charter, we framed them around what we called the 4 Cs, which was community, connectivity, climate and character. And under the kind of climate and also to some extent the character part of that quality charter, it recognised the importance of managing surface water sustainably and the role that sustainable drainage systems have to play in enhancing the biodiversity, but also the desirability of new developments. So to inform all of this growth in the area, we produced a number of evidence-based documents related to flood risk and drainage, which I think has already been mentioned, is quite a key part of developing policy. So we had a strategic flood risk assessment, and we also produced with partners a county-wide water cycle strategy, which provided us with a method for determining what sustainable water infrastructure was required, where it was needed and when it was needed to support development. So the phase 1 water cycle strategy, which was produced back in 2008, basically found that there were no major constraints to growth, but it also encouraged the use of sustainable drainage systems. And that's particularly important in the Cambridge area, as our watercourses in the city actually have no capacity to take any additional surface water runoff from development. And that was found through some surface water management plans that we produced for the city. So if we move to my next slide, that's kind of the context that's then brought us on to developing, as I mentioned, an area action plan for the Northwest Cambridge development. So just a very quick overview of that site. It's a site that is being brought forward by the University of Cambridge on land released from the Greenbelt, and it was only released from the Greenbelt because of the needs of the university and the kind of the economic contribution that the university brings, not just to Cambridge, but also to the kind of wider UK economy. So it's a major mixed-use development comprising 3,000 new homes, of which 50% were for university key workers. There's academic facilities, new primary school, local centre, community facilities, and a significant amount of green infrastructure. Now, the site actually straddles 2 local authorities, so it straddles Cambridge City and South Cambridge District Council. And because of that, and also because of the scale of the development, that was when we decided that we would produce an area action plan for the site, which would set out site-specific policies that development of that site would need to meet. So on to the next slide. This kind of provides you with an overview of what the area action plan covers. So if we move to the next slide, that's the one. So basically, as I've already mentioned, it provided us with an opportunity to prepare more detailed policy guidance and to cover some areas that we didn't really have covered in the local plan for the whole of Cambridge. So it identified a vision and key objectives for the development, and that included a vision for the site to be an exemplar of sustainable living and to accommodate the impacts of our changing climate. And that was reflected in the setting of specific construction standards for the site. Now, I would point out that this document was produced back in the days before we had the National Planning Policy Framework. So I don't know if any of you remember the old Planning Policy Statement 1 supplement on climate change, but we used that, and we used the specific circumstances of this site to actually require for the whole of the site to be brought forward at Code for Sustainable Homes Level 5, which, as many of you will be aware, includes quite stringent water efficiency requirements of 80 litres per person per day. And that really was one of the driving forces behind the water sensitive urban design approach that's now being implemented on the site and that Suzanne will cover shortly. So in addition to that Code Level 5 policy requirement, we also had a specific policy in the area action plan related to the use of sustainable drainage systems, which on our next slide just gives you a brief overview of what that policy includes. So we recognised quite early on that there was significant potential for this site to utilise sustainable drainage systems. And I would say, in terms of the whole partnership working that we've already been talking about today, that approach had full support from the off from the University of Cambridge. And as I've mentioned, this is the first document in which we actually developed a detailed sustainable drainage policy. So where we'd had policy before, it was quite a general policy and it only really recommended the use of SUDs, but it didn't really require the use of them. And this was part in recognition of the sensitive nature of the site, and there were already issues of flood risk that were affecting neighbouring communities, and they were very, very active, those neighbouring communities, in developing the area action plan and responding to the consultations. And we had some quite detailed evidence from local residents submitted about flood risk when we were producing the area action plan. So the policy basically requires that the surface water drainage for the site is designed as a sustainable drainage system. It requires that the site kind of holds water on the site so that it's released at an equal or slower rate, that it should be designed and integrated into the development with multiple benefits, and we were quite specific in saying we wanted multiple benefits, and that it needed to make allowance for future climate change. So if we move to the next slide, as you can imagine, with any proposals for large-scale development, and drainage was a key concern for residents, and we did end up having a session on the drainage policy for this site at the examination of the area action plan. And this was back in the day, I think, when people weren't really that aware of what sustainable drainage systems were. So it was actually challenged as a suitable solution for the site. I think there were concerns that due to a high water table in the area, sustainable drainage wasn't something that could be used on site. So we have had a bit of a challenge there, and an important lesson that we learned is that actually you really need to promote a wide range of sustainable drainage systems and demonstrate the benefits that they offer compared to a traditional drainage solution. There was also a little bit of a lack of a bit of frustration of the lack of detail in the area action plan. I think people actually wanted to see a drainage design there and then, which isn't really a level of detail we would go into in a document like this. But as I say, we had the full support of the university as a landowner on the site, and I think that was very important for us in taking this document through examination, and that policy did pass through the examination without any changes to it. So I think that in part was helped by having quite detailed evidence base, and we also have got internal drainage officers who were able to help in taking that policy through the examination process. So on to my last but one slide now, really. This really now kind of takes us through to what we've learned from our experience on developing the policy from the area action plan, and also other growth sites around the city. We've got a huge amount of growth taking place in Cambridge and the wider area at the moment. And our experience from Northwest Cambridge and from other growth sites around the city has now been translated into policy for Cambridge, which requires the use of sustainable drainage systems for all scales of development. As I mentioned earlier, this kind of it's different from national policy, which only talks about the use of SUDs for major developments. We've required it across all scales of development in our new local plan, just because of the level of surface water flood risk facing the city and that lack of capacity in our watercourses. So we've developed, as I say, a new local plan for Cambridge. It's possibly one of the longest local plan processes in recent years. I don't know how many of you may have followed the saga of our local plan, but we actually submitted our documents for examination back in 2013. And we didn't adopt it until 2018. So I think that is one of the longest local plan examinations going. But actually, I think because we'd already had a lot of discussions about sustainable drainage and integrated water management as part of the process for the Northwest Cambridge development, I think a lot of our residents had started to kind of come around to our way of thinking and had started to see the benefits of those policies as a whole. So what I would say is this time round, from a local plan examination perspective, we didn't get a lot of challenge to the policy. So it wasn't really considered during the local plan examination. I think developers were fully on board with the need for that policy, and it certainly is an issue that is raised in every single pre-application meeting that we have with developers. So there was very little challenge this time round to us introducing a policy that applies to all scales of development, and really is, it is called integrated water management and the water cycle. So it requires that kind of multifunctional, multi-benefit approach from drainage systems. So, that level of support that we've had has been really helpful in getting that document through the examination process. We've had a lot of evidence base produced to support the document as well and the policy. So I would say, that's one of the key areas in developing policy, is making sure that you've got that evidence base in place to support. So we had our surface water management plan, which gave us a very strong evidence base to say, why are we applying this to all scales of development? We've got the water cycle strategy and strategic flood risk assessment there to support policy development. And yeah, getting references into the role of drainage in giving priority to using nature services, water being seen as a resource and reusing where practicable. I can't actually speak. Interestingly, when we tried to develop when we were developing the local plan originally, we did have a policy in the local plan that did require, in terms of water efficiency, we were originally trying to get a policy adopted of 80 litres per person per day for water efficiency, kind of picking up from the approach we'd taken at Northwest Cambridge. But as many of you will probably be aware, we have had the issue of the housing standards review in the interim, so that policy was removed from our plan by the inspector, but we are using our integrated water management policy to try and promote water resource where possible. And we are now in the process of producing a new local plan for both Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. So we've only just adopted our existing local plan, and we're now re-looking at a new local plan, which I think will cover the period up to 2045. So again, this is going to be a very key issue for us to address through that local plan. The issue of water stress has really come to the forefront in recent months. We have had some significant issues with some of the rivers and chalk streams in the area actually drying up over this summer. So it is going to be a very important issue for us to address across both Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire now, moving forwards into the future. And we are going to be commissioning a new water cycle strategy for the area, along with updates to kind of surface to strategic flood risk assessments, and where we need them, surface water management plans as well. And I think, moving on to my next slide, that's it from me. So just a kind of quick whistle-stop tour of our approach to local plan policy.
Great, thank you, Emma. Thank you for that presentation. Really, really helpful in terms of explaining the process, what you've done. So there is, as I said, there is an overview of the policy in policies in the guidance. And I suppose that we've got one question, just given a chance for other people to come in. I just wouldn't mind asking Emma. So you've got some quite strong policies there, and it sounds like you might be going for even stronger policies in the future. Are you concerned about developers' response to having your strong policy, or have they actually welcomed that in terms of providing greater certainty?
I think because we have raised this issue so many times now as part of pre-application, I think developers are pretty much on board with, the reasons why they have to address this. Certainly some of the really big house builders that we work with, I think they are kind of used to the sorts of things that we're asking for now. And I think they realise that this is such an important issue for the area. Both authorities have also declared climate emergencies. So I think they can see that actually from I suppose, a public support for development, this is an issue that they really do need to address. So I think many of them can actually see the benefits of responding to this, and just not thinking about water as something that needs to be gotten rid of as quickly as possible. I think they are seeing the benefits of integrating it into the wider kind of green infrastructure for development, and the benefits that can bring, not just for residents, but I suppose also uplifts in costs of houses as well. I mean, we have seen some of the properties that overlook some of the SUDS features have been sold for quite high values. So,
and Emma, I think that point you made there is really helpful in terms of trying to sell the value of SUDS to developers. Would they recognise that this is that there's a premium on some of those properties?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think that is really important. I think one of the things I would say that has been a real benefit for us is that we do have internal sustainable drainage engineers.
Yeah.
And they will engage very, very early on in the development process. So they're always engaged at the pre-app stage. So that has been of benefit. And I know that's not something that many local planning authorities are able to do.
Yeah, definitely value there. So coming back to the questions, we've got a question, thank you for that response. We've got a question here from Claire Seddon, who has asked, is there any advice how local development plan policy should work with SUDS mandatory standards and the SUDS approval process in Wales? At our local development plan examination prevents us from making SUDS a requirement due to this problem?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because that didn't really come up for us as an issue during the local plan examination process, and actually our policies all point to using the CIRIA guidance for SUDS. So we always point people towards the SUDS manual and planning for SUDS. So yeah, it's not something that came up through our examination process in terms of, well, you're going against, I suppose, NPPF in terms of that only applies to major development. And I think what was of benefit to us there was the strength of our evidence base that actually showed, Cambridge is in, I think, the top 2% of settlements at risk of surface water flooding in England.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think having that evidence base to show that actually there is no capacity for any runoff from any scale of development is a very strong argument as to why we need to go beyond those national policy requirements.
Okay, great. Got another couple of questions. There's one from Matt, who I think is asking, did you initially struggle trying to get buy-in from other functions and other departments and other colleagues within the council when trying to make SUDS such a strong priority in terms of policy?
Not from within the city council. We have had some interesting discussions with the Highways Authority in terms of SUDS in the highways. So that sometimes limits the use of certain techniques. But I think before we introduce the policy, it comes down to having that local champion, which has already been mentioned. So our drainage engineer at the time, Simon Bunn, and my predecessor did a huge amount of work to get everybody on board with the benefits of using SUDS, to the point where we as a local authority will actually adopt SUDS that are provided in open spaces that we will adopt. So yeah, there was a huge effort made to try and really promote the use of SUDS across the council. But it's not always been easy in discussions with other local authority partners.
I can imagine, yeah. And And you're not alone, and I think that's an issue that we probably need to work together to try and work out how we can embrace our colleagues in highway authorities to
Yes.
look at sustainable drainage and permeable paving and understand that they're not, that their uncertainties can be overcome, and there is evidence to suggest they perform well. So anyway, enough of that rant for another day. So thank you for that answer, and thank you for the question, Matt Williams. We're moving now on to a question from Ingo, and it'll be our last question. So he's asked, how much is the overlap or integration between IWM and green infrastructure, also a multifunctional benefits concept, which theme is more dominant or easier to sell to developers?
Okay, so our policy actually talks about managing surface water close to its source, but it talks about priority being given to nature services. It talks about water sensitive urban design. We talk about features being multifunctional wherever possible in their land use. So we try to get a lot of that wording about integration and multiple benefits and multifunctionality into the wording of policy. And I think actually for most developers, you know, land is a bit of a constraint in Cambridge. I would say land has to work very, very hard. So I think most of them are seeing that they've got to integrate it into green infrastructure. I think the key thing is to make sure you can get those discussions happening early on in the development process. So really early in the pre-app process, we are talking about sustainable drainage, and we're trying to say to developers, you know, your layout of your development should be informed by your drainage requirements and not the other way around, so that it is getting integrated into the green infrastructure. So that's quite a critical part in those discussions, is getting in early on. Most developers are on board with that idea now. We do have some where the idea of multifunctional spaces and having kind of open spaces that can flood for a short period of time has been a difficult thing to sell. And we continue to have difficulties. It's related to schools sometimes, and trying to see, you know, having spaces that can, you know, be temporary flood storage that's a difficult discussion around kind of schools, for example. But I would say a lot of the other developers are open to that approach.
Yeah, I think we've been providing guidance for Greater London Authority, and I think all of this is about how you couch the value and benefit of what you're doing. And I think there is an awful lot of overlap between the aspirations and outcomes you want from blue-green infrastructure and integrated water management. So I suppose it's what is your pressing need, and what have you got the strongest policy to deliver?
And I think actually our climate emergency declarations will start to drive some of that forwards more as well now. So we will be commissioning work on green infrastructure to support our new local plan, and that includes, you know, reference to drainage, blue infrastructure. It's all in there. So there's those common themes throughout all the work that we're doing now. Lots of overlap between different areas of work.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for your presentation and the time for the questions. We're going to move on to Suzanne Scobie now from Aecom to talk about one of the examples that we've got in the guidance, and she's had an integral role in making that happen. So as before, please think about the questions and type the questions in the question box for Suzanne. Suzanne, I'm now making you the presenter, so if you're on mute, please do unmute yourself, and the presentation's yours.
Excellent. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's all good.
Excellent. So the next question is, can you see me? Well, not me, but can you see my slide?
Yeah. Once you clicked on we can see it in presentation format as well. So
excellent. That's good news. Good. Can you see the webinar box, or is that hidden?
No, that's just on your screen. So got a clear screen.
That's good. Excellent. No, thank you for that. I just wanted to check it wasn't blocking any words that were about to appear. So good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at today's event. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to share with you how the use of SUDs at the Eddington development by the University of Cambridge has provided many benefits to those who will live and work at the development and also in the surrounding area. I initially became involved in the project when we were appointed to provide multidisciplinary engineering support to the university. When I joined the project team, Aecom were already providing master planning, sustainability, landscape and town planning support to the university. And the team I was involved in brought along civil engineering, structural engineering, mechanical engineering to the party. Of the various engineering roles my team have provided, it's the work we've undertaken in relation to the management of surface water, which my presentation relates to. Today, I'll provide an introduction to the project before going on to explain how the design of the surface water drainage and the non-potable water networks developed from master planning through to construction. So what led to the development at Eddington? As Emma has said, the university is, it's one of the world's leading universities. It's known for its excellence of teaching and research, and it makes a significant contribution to the prosperity of the city as well as the UK economy. In order to maintain its reputation, the university needed to continue to develop and grow. It needed to address its issues of the lack of affordable accommodation for staff and postgrads, and the need to foster and encourage research and development. It's planned that student numbers could increase by about 5,000 over the next 25 years and staff by 3,000. With high house prices and high rents, the university identified that it needed to provide affordable accommodation for postgrads and staff. There's also this thing called the Cambridge phenomenon, which relates to business and academic interests becoming more closely linked, with universities and companies working together on research projects. That clustering of high-tech companies in the region, kind of the university's expansion was a benefit. It would benefit that and encourage those links to be taken full advantage of. So Emma's already touched on what the development comprises, so I'll skip over this. The university's vision was to create a new urban extension to Cambridge. The development principles relating to landscape and drainage are included for the creation of a central parkland and a wildlife corridor linking the surrounding development areas. A place for the community to enjoy with a range of high quality green spaces and good pedestrian and cycle links. As you know, Cambridge is known for its cycle infrastructure. A green landscaped area running alongside the M11 to provide a landscape setting to the northwestern edge of Cambridge and provide the opportunity for extensive habitat restoration and enhancement. And as Emma mentioned, the development had to be underpinned by the highest environmental standards, embodying best practice and environmental sustainability. The university wanted the development to be an exemplar of sustainable living, able to accommodate impacts of climate change, and as Emma said, we had to secure credits for BREEAM Excellent and Code Level 5 and consider the use of water and future possible water consumption, what we could do. The area action plan that Emma mentioned had a specific comment that I'll bring up here. Surface water drainage is designed as a sustainable drainage system to reduce overall runoff volumes leaving the site, to control the rate of flow, and to improve water quality before it joins the Washpit Brook, which is the watercourse which passes through the site. That was kind of the brief that we started with. I joined the project team in 2010 and became the project manager for the infrastructure design. Our team supported the engineering input to the development of the master plan and the outline planning application before going on to design the site-wide roads, utilities and drainage in phase 1, and for many of the parcels of land that were developed in phase 1. And we had to coordinate our designs alongside the university's multidisciplinary team. So the university had a brief for a high quality landscape with consideration of a landscape of ecology and engineering. We needed to understand the existing drainage regime and the flooding mechanisms that were present. So we included an allowance in the master plan for the conveyance of surface water and attenuation in open features. We worked with the master planners to orientate blocks to work with topography and to consider the exceedance flows. We worked with a landscape team to incorporate cascading suds to provide a treatment train and to restrict the peak discharge leaving the development and long-term storage to avoid an increase in surface water leaving the development. So the university started working with the local government in Cambridge in the early 90s. From the outset, consideration was given to how to integrate surface water management within the master plan and each iteration of the master plan included a network of green fingers and a landscape park adjacent to the motorway. The master plan evolved from 2005 to 2011 through to sort of getting the formalisation of planning from 2013. So the master plan, which accompanied the planning application, had a series of swales adjacent to the main streets and within the green fingers, ponds for attenuation, landscaping bunds and a relief channel in the western edge as part of the Washpit Brook flood reduction scheme. That flood reduction scheme was sort of produced in response to the feedback that came through from the residents downstream at Girton and the sort of, the considerations in the area action plan of local flooding issues. A minimum of 2 stages of treatment were available for runoff from pavement surfaces prior to discharge into the relief channel. So the deliverables prepared to support the planning application and the discharge of various conditions created a framework for the development and delivery of the SUDs at Eddington. The flood risk assessment and the surface water drainage strategy submitted with the planning application established the principles for the management of surface water at the development. In order to discharge a series of site-wide conditions, the principles in those initial documents were further developed to consider how the use of potable water could be reduced. And then specific proposals for each part of the site were presented to the city and district councils for approval at the reserve matters stage. The Environment Agency's flood zone map shows the site to be almost entirely in flood zone 1. But flood zone mapping hadn't been undertaken for the section of the Washpit Brook through the site, and we built a hydraulic model of the brook to assess that fluvial flood risk. That model indicated that the majority of the site was in flood zone 1, but a small portion was located within flood zones 2 and 3 if the watercourse was unaltered. The flood map also identified the potential for significant flooding at the confluence of the Washpit Brook and Beck Brook, which is situated approximately 2 kilometres downstream of the site. So in this section, I'll explain the considerations that were made during the design of the landscape corridor on the western edge of the development to create a scheme that mitigated the potential for flood risk to arise. There was a series of constraints that inform the development of the western edge proposals. In order to respond to the area action plan and the client's brief, we needed to reduce flood risk downstream and create an amenity space. So the proposals included for the creation of a 2-stage channel along the alignment of the existing watercourse, which increased the capacity of the watercourse and enabled a maintenance strip to be retained. Also, we had a creation of a new relief channel closer to the development to receive flows from the attenuation lagoons and to provide additional storage downstream of a new control structure. We included bunds in the landscaping to provide visual and acoustic screening for the development from the motorway and to accommodate material arising from the development. And those bunds were designed to assist in the storage of floodwater and also to assist in protecting the development from flooding. Those features enabled the peak flows downstream of the site to be reduced for a range of return periods and for excess flow to be stored in the landscaped areas of the development. These images present cross-sections through the lagoon and the bund in the western edge. Don't know if you can see my mouse, possibly not. The top image presents an illustration of the landscaped western edge. On the very left-hand side, you have the motorway. Then we have the existing Washpit Brook, which would be upgraded into a 2-stage channel. There's then the maintenance strip, which you can see in grey, before a new bund, and then the lagoon, which I'll come on to later because that was a multi-function water space, and then the development on the eastern side. Below that is a section sort of through the alleviation channel, and it indicates sort of the complex control that would be provided, and then a section through into the lagoon. So I'm now going to talk about how the SUD strategy was developed and the various forms of SUDs that have been incorporated into the proposals. So the geology here is mainly clay, which is all the areas of brown, with a few areas of gravels and sands in blue, and an area of reworked chalk in green. That area was prone to creating solution features, so there was limited potential for infiltration at the site, and as already been mentioned, there was a high groundwater table. There was a ridge line which is shown in crosshatch, and that area was not part of the catchment for the Washpit Brook. We also had, were informed that there was in the northeastern part of the site was a wet spot, and we had to consider how we were going to respond to that. And I had a series of trees and hedgerows that we had to retain, and we couldn't change site levels in those areas. Our runoff rate was limited to the existing catchment to the Washpit Brook. The increased catchment area to the east of the ridgeline enabled a significant resource of rainwater to be generated. We had the opportunity to modify the landscape to reduce flood risk downstream and to drain the area that was part of the wet spot. We had the opportunity to create a high quality environment for the university, and with our clients' long-term interest in the project, we had the opportunity to challenge traditional engineering solutions and create a best practice example. The surface water drainage strategy was a comprehensive report which defined the runoff rate from each plot into 8 drainage networks at the site. The characteristics of each plot were considered: its size, underlying geology, and location in relation to the ridgeline. The illustrative master plan was reviewed to determine the likely permeable and impermeable areas. Runoff from those areas was assigned to the networks in order to determine the size of swales and the subsurface pipe and manhole network. The strategy identified the likely attenuation volumes required on each plot and what forms of attenuation we considered were likely to be suitable. The strategy also identified the volume of attenuation and long-term storage required in each lagoon. This document referred back to the flood risk assessment, but also set the framework for the reserve matters designs that later followed. We worked alongside more than 10 architects in phase 1 to promote the integration of attenuation within the landscape to develop water-sensitive urban design solutions. Maintenance aspects were considered throughout the selection of drainage features. We ensured that levels were designed to consider exceedance events and coordinated the drainage solutions with tree pit root protection zones and the university's network of underground bins. We also attended many of the pre-app meetings up in Cambridge to discuss with the architects and with Simon Bunn and others how we could integrate rills, swales, permeable paving, green roofs and various other solutions into the design proposals. This is an example of a street within the development. The primary street will be adopted by the county council. The swales in this corridor are the only swales which are limited to receiving runoff from adoptable highway surfaces only. In contrast, the other streets will be retained within the university's ownership and could receive runoff from the streets and the surrounding hard landscaping. Extensive consideration of these corridors was needed to ensure sufficient space was available for the road, pedestrian and cycle facilities, the verge, landscaping, trees, swales, parking areas, refuse collection facilities, which included underground bins, and the various underground utilities. This is an example of a green corridor in the heart of the phase 1 development, which incorporates pedestrian footbridges to link parts of the development together. It is on a strategic cycle route through the site, linking the western edge through the district centre and out to the city centre to the east. This is one of the largest green corridors in phase 1 and provides online attenuation storage in addition to conveyance and treatment. The swales formed part of the surface water network and we retained in the university's ownership. This is an illustration of one of the lagoons that will be provided to create a space for recreation, as well as attenuation and treatment of the surface water runoff. So then, as mentioned, the East of England has the lowest rainfall in the country and is classified as semi-arid. The Area Action Plan required that the development incorporates water conservation measures to reduce potable water consumption. In order to meet Code Level 5, we needed to reduce the daily use of potable water from 150 litres per head per day to 80 litres per head per day. This table shows potential potable and non-potable water uses of a home built to Code Level 5 using the code's water calculator. It identifies that non-potable water can provide approximately 1/3 of a person's daily water use through its use in flushing toilets, washing machines, and irrigating gardens. The university's team reviewed a series of options to reduce potable water use. They considered plot-based rainwater or greywater recycling, site-wide wastewater recycling to a non-potable standard, site-wide surface water recycling to a non-potable standard, a combination of wastewater and surface water recycling, in addition to the use of water-saving devices. Consideration was also given to whether these facilities should be installed to each dwelling, to a group of properties, or on a site-wide basis. The university chose to use a site-wide rainwater recycling facility. Rainfall would discharge from each plot into the site-wide network. It would pass through swales in the green fingers before being intercepted, treated, and returned to each plot as non-potable water. and outfall to the river would be maintained at greenfield rates. Each plot would also be connected to the incoming potable water main, whilst foul water would continue to discharge to the foul water network. This process ensured that all properties would be connected to the non-potable water network and would satisfy the credits for code and BREEAM. This image shows how the principles from the figure on the last slide work at a local level. In the centre of the image is one of the green corridors. The swale in the green corridor forms part of the drainage network and conveys and treats the surface water runoff. Runoff also enters the swale from the adjacent street. The swale discharges into the lagoon from where water is collected, treated, and pumped back to properties as non-potable water. The treatment includes reed bed filters, ultraviolet light, and chlorination. Once the lower part of the lagoon that supplies the non-water potable system is full, surface water is discharged to the Washpit Brook. Cambridge Water designed and adopted the treatment plant and the non-potable water network. So in terms of the process that it went through to determine the storage requirements, we reviewed the historic data from Cambridge Botanic Gardens to determine the potential supply of rainwater. Allowances were made for evapotranspiration and maintaining some runoff to the Washpit Brook. We reviewed the population by network to determine the potential demand for non-potable water. We were liaising with Cambridge Water about the design of the facility, and they recommended that 30 days storage of non-potable water was incorporated within the proposals. We determined the volume of storage required to maintain a non-potable supply throughout the year, allowing for the seasonality of rainfall. The larger the volume to restock the non-potable supply or the long-term storage for each catchment was included within the lagoon and taken forwards within the various different strategies that we did post-planning. With the use of potable and non-potable water and the incorporation of water-efficient devices, the savings could be 750,000 litres of potable water per day for a population of 8,500 people. So what stage has the project reached? The archaeology was completed quite early on. Building began in 2015 with the school opening in 2016, and phase one is now largely complete. But the development will keep going through to 2028, and phase two is now currently in the design process. One of the commitments made in the potable water supply strategy was to construct the lagoon at an early stage in order that the lower part could fill up before any water was extracted from it. In response to planning policy and comments from the EA and City Council, commitments were given that the main surface water drainage infrastructure would be constructed in advance of any discharge being permitted from a plot into the network in order to provide that plot with a drained outfall to the brook. Runoff from each plot would be restricted to the rates specified in the drainage strategy during construction. And the construction of the Washpit Brook Relief Channel and the main phase one drainage network and retention lagoon would take place as part of the very first works of the development to ensure that pollution control protection and attenuation provision was in place during the construction of phase one. And this photo shows how those commitments were delivered. Through the completion of phase one, the university has constructed green corridors, attenuation lagoons, a flood reduction scheme, a water treatment plant, and the provision of both potable and non-potable water connections to every property in the development so far. They have achieved a reduction in the use of potable water and a reduction in downstream flood risk, and have created an attractive environment with a landscape park that offers multi-use amenities. These photos are from one of the green corridors within phase one. The bottom right image illustrates how the site is expected to look once the trees are established. The other two photos show how the site looked last year when I had the opportunity to visit, and you may recognise similar photos from the front cover of the new guidelines. So what have we learned from this project? One solution can have multiple benefits. Constraints can be redesigned to provide a series of opportunities. Sustainable and green solutions, such as swales and treatment lagoons, can be easier to build and maintain than mechanical engineering solutions and bring aesthetic benefits with them. Rainwater is a resource that has the potential to become increasingly scarce. It should therefore be looked after and reused wherever possible. We are proud to have been involved in such a landmark project and are now sharing some of the best practice designs supported by the university with other clients. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Suzanne, for that. Again, please, if you have any questions, please do add those to the list. My first question, Suzanne, would be, your last slide talked about sharing the good practice with other clients. What's been the easiest to replicate in other projects?
We're still waiting for some of them to come through to fruition. So we've worked on some quite significant schemes, sort of the old Aecom Park Royal development, where we've been looking at sort of the opportunities of looking at water use in sort of central London, and through various other integrated water management studies that my colleagues have been writing. We've been supporting the idea of these, which can then get incorporated within planning.
Yeah.
I think the Cambridge, this site, it's not unique. Whilst it has a landowner with a major use of long-term interest in the site, but if you plan a development that's got a series of different land uses within it, you could sort of replicate this in other locations. One of the things that helped us here was you had sort of a large supermarket, so that had a big roof, but with a very small water demand, next to a block of flats, which had a very sort of small yield of roof, in terms of impermeable space on the roof, but a high demand for water. And where you have these mixed-use developments, you end up with a sort of being able to share that resource of rainwater that falls, because different uses need water at different times or at different levels of different volumes. So it's by putting the different, looking at this in a holistic sense, and actually sort of capturing that in a network area, you can get these wider benefits.
Great.
I mean, throughout sort of London and other dense urban areas where there is a lot of pressure on water supply or a challenge to bring and upgrade water mains, being able to actually capture rainwater and reuse it to reduce the amount of potable water that you need, so that you can use this for sort of, in this case, it was used for not just flushing toilets. The plumbing in every building was put in place so that washing machines could be connected to it, as well as garden irrigation. It really did make quite a big difference to the water that would otherwise have been used.
Northwest Cambridge is, I mean, it's the best example we've got, I think, in terms of integrated water management. So it's really useful that you gave that presentation. So I still have a few more questions. There's quite a technical one from Dan Martin. It's asked, was a 3-stage flow control used to achieve long-term storage, or was all runoff released at Q-bar?
Ooh, that is a good one. Right, okay, that's going to test me. It was a complex control, and it did have different levels of discharge. I'm trying to remember whether it was 5, 30, and 100. But yes, we had various different settings that we had, different rates of discharge at different return periods from each of the lagoons. One of the things that we agreed with the City Council was that we would always recharge the volume that was needed to maintain that storage of non-potable water across the year. So in the event that sort of it had been particularly dry, any rainwater that would come in would fill the lagoon. And once that lagoon had reached the volume that we'd calculated, that sort of was always needed to keep the system to capture more in the wetter months for the dry months. Once that level was reached, only then did we discharge into one of the alleviation channels to the brook. So that was that sort of, above, so all those discharge points, the complex control was set above that sort of volume of storage that we needed to keep the system working.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Suzanne, and that question, Dan. Suzanne, this will be your last specific question, and then we'll open up the panel to more general questions. So, delegates, if you have any questions that you'd like to pose from now on, can you please identify who on the panel you'd like to answer, or whether they're more general. So, Suzanne, the last question is from Amy Burbridge, that was asking how would this work with individual householders operating for non-potable water, as this is mainly let properties which the university will manage, so the long-term management is a bit easier.
I understand the point. There are some private properties for sale here, as well as the university's ones that they're keeping. So it is a case that sort of as each of the other developers has come along board, they've had to maintain and take the networks through. There's also a whole district heating system as well. So it's sort of all properties have to sort of get a district heating connection, a potable connection, and a non-potable connection. The plumbing was also sort of set up specifically to keep the two systems separate, so you couldn't accidentally connect the dishwasher to the non-potable that goes to the washing machine. There is a management agent on the site. The specifics of how anyone's inducted to the area, I don't know. That would be a question for university, but it was the case that there's a balance of both private and university-owned accommodation here. So I'm sure they've managed it. I just don't know the details between how they've briefed the residents.
Sure. Brilliant. Well, thank you for those questions and answers and your presentation. So, Emma, do you want to unmute yourself when you respond to the question? So, while I'm waiting for the delegates to warm up with their questions, I suppose my question would be, assuming Brexit has been done and you're in the pub with the Minister for CLG, what would be on your top 2 wish lists for them to do with regards to driving forward integrated water management? So if I start with Peter, right. I'm sure you've been in this situation before.
I have. I would say implement Schedule 3 of the Foreign Water Management Act. There are things in there which would really help this. One is adoption of SUDs, and the other is the automatic right to connect. And I think if we started with having both of those on a statutory basis, so that there wasn't an automatic right to connect, I mean, that would really help with the issues of driving forward water efficiency. But also, we need the facility that was going to be offered with SUD adoption. You can see in the report examples of how people have got around the issue of adoption of SUDs, but until we have some sort of nationwide, or rather England-wide, because this is being adopted in Wales, until we have some England-wide standards for adopting SUDs, we're not really going to be able to move this forward very quickly.
Yes, well, I'd agree with Peter there. If you read the guidance, look at the national policy, certainly in Wales they have a much better overarching system, in fact even law, in terms of trying to achieve sustainable development. So I'd agree with his point about making Schedule 3 compulsory. I would also add, given that the government is apparently serious about tackling the climate emergency, and hundreds of local authorities have also declared climate emergencies, then the planning policy, the NPPF and guidance needs to be toughened up on mitigation and adaptation. I'd encourage the Secretary of State to include a hyperlink to this CIRIA guidance in the planning practice guidance.
Great stuff.
Yes, I certainly agree with that.
Cool. Before I pass on to Emma and Suzanne, I suppose it's with the design. So WaterUK have recently been talking with Ofwat with regards to an adoption code for sewers, and in April 2020, the water and sewage undertakers will have the ability to adopt SUDs or sewers that perform as SUDs. So that will hopefully help with the adoption process, but again, there's a capacity building process and an engagement process that needs to be undertaken. So we will watch that space. So Emma, if you were sat opposite the Minister for Housing and Communities and Local Government, I'm not sure who that is or whether...
No, I can't keep up.
Yeah.
I'd certainly agree on the adoption side, but I think my 2 would be to reinstate the ability for local authorities in water-stressed areas to be able to set water efficiency requirements of 80 litres per person per day, because I think that would again help to drive a water-sensitive urban design approach. And I would also suggest that national policy needs to apply to all scales of development, given the issue of cumulative impacts.
Okay, great stuff. And Suzanne? What would you say if you were with the MHCLG minister?
I think it's one of those bits that sort of Code and BREEAM brought in a series of requirements on designers where we had to deal with runoff and volume, and then sort of when they kind of changed a bit, it changed changed what we had to do, and now there's a sort of presumption in favour of water development sustainable. There's something towards it that's good enough. Sometimes when I look at various planning applications made where I live, the local authority, the EA, our county council, the LLFA, they're small, so they don't particularly put much of a comment in there. And I search through the FRAs looking for long-term storage, and all I see is greenfield runoff, and no one's looking at the volume that goes out. So I think actually sort of going back to sort of making those aspects of not increasing flood risk downstream, not increasing the volume that runs off, or making it refer back to long-term storage and 2 litres per second per hectare would be an improvement, and sort of also sort of dealing with more of a requirement for looking at surface water recycling or the management of sort of the surface water. It's clearer, because I think at the moment it's inconsistent between local authorities. You have the very educated ones, and then you have the much smaller district and borough councils who don't have maybe as much information or expertise. Clearer direction from the top would enable that sort of to be a wholesale improvement across the country.
Great. So are there any more questions coming forward for anyone on the panel? Because otherwise I will let you go back to your lunch. We do want to come back to a question that was posed by Matt around whether water quality had impeded delivery of housing. So Andrew's been rifling through the document.
Yes. Yes. Well, two things basically. First of all, the guidance, part A of the guidance, the main guidance, includes on pages 22 and 23 information and guidance about creating integrated water management strategies. And we found in several of the physical case studies and the local plan that having an integrated water management strategy was crucial in delivering better water management. So there's some good guidance there. And also, in terms of the local plan examples, LP14, which is Arran District Council, there's a reference in there to a policy for inland Arran and large housing schemes there, and how they have to overcome the hurdle of the limited capacity of the local wastewater treatment plant. Also in the back of Part C, we also refer to the Partnership for South Hampshire, which is the area which has particularly been affected by the issue of nutrients in the Solent. Again, they've got an integrated water management strategy which has provided the basis for policies in the local plans, including that for Havant District Council. Yeah, go and look at those sections of the guidance, and if you go on the Partnership for South Hampshire website, you'll also see there's been some recent correspondence between them and DEFRA about the relative roles of Natural England and the Environment Agency in determining water quality standards and the relationship between water quality standards and environmental permitting regs. And this is all to do with the issue of nutrients in the Solent. So there's some up-to-date advice there.
Great. Okay, so there has been no questions, so I will just to start to wrap up. So a number of you have been asking whether a link will be circulated. The easiest and best way to find out when our new content is available with regards to these types of videos is probably to go onto the susdrain website, which is on the screen there, and sign on to the newsletter. So basically, the YouTube videos for this will be on our susdrain channel there, and it will be also notified on our newsletter. So just before we wrap up, I really want to thank our speakers, Peter, Andrew, Emma and Suzanne, for their really good presentations and their thorough answers to the questions. Please don't forget to download the guidance and tell colleagues that it's available. And I also would like to thank Peter and Andrew for their work on the guidance, and our project steering group and the chair for their input. We also want to thank the funders that are involved, and I'd personally like to thank my colleagues from CIRIA that enabled the work to progress, and that was Louise Walker, Suzanne Simmons, and Claire Drake, who looked after the publication process. So thanks for your questions and time, and as it's so close to the Christmas break, have a good one and a Happy New Year.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Have a good Christmas.
Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
Bye. Bye.